Welcome, listeners, to Season 2 of the Infinite Library Podcast. We're kicking it off with Mysteries of Pittsburgh by Michael Chabon, his first novel published in 1988. Mysteries of Pittsburgh is a lot of things. It is a city mysteries novel, a queer novel, a Bildungsroman. It's a story of the wonderment and sort of enchantment that can happen the summer after you graduate college and you have no idea what you're doing. John and I had a great time talking about this one, and as we've talked sort of before, Chabon's kind of a lodestone or a North Star for this podcast in the way that he merges literary fiction and genre, and he writes about reading, and you can tell that he is a reader himself, and sort of that all comes through in our discussion as we kind of talk about what we liked about the book, what we like about Chabon, and what we remember from reading as kids, because Chabon, a lot of his concerns are with rehabilitating the idea of entertainment, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in the coming episodes. What is entertainment? Is it necessarily bad? Can entertainment be edifying? We hope to explore these questions in the next couple of episodes, and we definitely do in this one. So, as always, give us a follow on Infinite Library Podcast on X, formerly Twitter, or Spotify, or YouTube, where we're the Infinite Library Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Great little anecdote. I was kind of doing some refresh during my lunch break at work today, and my incredibly Gen X coworker walks by me in the break room. This guy, he has his own office.
Oh man,
he's completely barren except a framed Wilco poster.
Oh my god!
And he's like, he walks by me. He's never spoken to me before today. He says, "That's a great book."
Oh, to be Gen X, John. Oh, to have my corner office with my single poster of Jeff Tweedy in it.
Yeah, I started the year. I was like, I don't know. I never got on Storygraph because, frankly, I just found like trying to transfer to a different app to be enervating.
Yeah.
And so I gave up on Goodreads because I just found it too stressful, and I got sick of like seeing like the stuff that people I went to college with were reading because it was all garbage.
Yeah.
I got so sick of seeing like, oh, you majored in English and now you read books with like those horrible like corporate Memphis covers that are like, you know, the girl at the library is fine.
All the coffee cups we've lost. Yeah,
exactly. And I just didn't want to see that anymore. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this in a notebook. And then I did that for like half the year. And then I was like, why am I doing this? Why do I need to track what I'm reading?
Paul Schrader, the man in the room, writing in his notebook, another book today. Yeah.
But now I haven't been doing it for a while, and now like I'm feeling like I'm kind of losing track of what I'm reading to some degree. Like I'm like stashing like a book under my bed and then like finding it 2 weeks later, and it's like, oh yeah, I was like halfway through this.
Yeah, the sort of that's the interesting thing about lists is I feel like there can be useful for knowing what happened as well, even if some people like to parade them about and be like, this is what I read. But I like being able to look at it and be like, oh, here's what happened. And then even more so, I can look at what I wrote and be like, oh, and then remember more. So
yeah. I guess it's just all about not being a slave to the list.
Yeah.
All right. Then
we're back.
Ben, it's so good it was wonderful sunning ourselves like a pair of beached whales on the white sand beaches of Mallorca. But let me tell you, it's great to be back in the dark, dank corridors. Just kidding, folks. They're not dark or dank. Well, they're dark. They're not dank. That's bad for books. Yeah, it's good to be back in the library. Good to be back in our little reading room. Good to be back in the big bed we share together.
Yeah, all the tourists said, who are the most fashionable Americans we've ever seen? And we said, sorry, we won't talk to you. And then we disappeared back into the library.
But yeah, Ben, what did you get up to on your summer break?
Well, I read a bunch of, I was like, okay, we got a couple of weeks, so I read a bunch of really short books, which is something I don't like to do because I feel like we've just been talking about list maxing. I feel like that's list maxing is to read I just read like 5 50-page books in like 2 weeks, but I actually found it like really enjoyable. So I kind of like just was like reading a bunch of really short things, and I read like, The Double Death of Quinces Waterbury, which is a book by the Brazilian author Jorge Amado. And it was just a really great like romp about a guy that was he had like a middle class family in Brazil, and then he just decided to be a bum, and he forsook his entire family. So the novel opens with him dying, and his respectable family are like, thank God, we're going to give him a proper wedding and he's going to come back into the fold. And then all of his like bum friends show up and they start like hanging out, and they accidentally spill alcohol on him. And then is he alive again? Possibly, but they basically just weekend at Bernie's his body through like all of the bars for one last evening, and then his body falls off a boat, and they're like, wow, he went out like he wanted to, not with his respectable family. And it was just a great 70 pages, and I was like, I felt refreshed afterwards. I was like, you know what, it's totally fine to read short books, especially if they're like this good.
There you go. Wow. Well, that sounds nice. I kind of did the opposite. I took advantage of this to kind of dig into some bigger books that I'd been putting off, just kind of due to, needing to keep my reading time for the show. So I read a couple kind of bigger works like Claude the Conciliator, second book of the Book of the New Sun.
We just talked about that.
Yeah. Need to find when I'm going to read the other two now, but we'll see. I read the new kind of King Arthur sequel retelling-y kind of book by Lev Grossman, The Bright Sword, after listening to Eden from Death Sentence do an episode on that a couple weeks ago. That was pretty good. I might have more thoughts on that down the line. Still kind of processing that. I'm a big King Arthur guy, so whenever I read one of those, it always takes me a little time to kind of totally decide how I feel about it. And then I actually kind of probably the biggest thing I read, and the thing I kind of want to plug on the show, because I'm guessing most people have not heard about this. I read the first two installments in a trilogy called Whom Gods Would Destroy, a paranormal history of World War I, which is kind of a really odd, interesting kind of horror fantasy like a series about like Nephilim during World War One, but it's told through the framing device of someone like compiling like historical documents of like paranormal activity before and after World War One, and it's definitely like citing like a lot of real events and like a lot of real sources, and then kind of weaving this narrative into the kind of this broader thing it's doing. I really kind
like
of
alternative history kind of
it's a little more like take a bunch of real history and then weave in a bunch of fake history and then make the reader kind of guess what's real and what's fake. And then as it goes on, it kind of gets a little bit more traditionally narrative. There are kind of like some journals of a couple like key players that kind of become the cornerstone, but he's kind of always still weaving in these very like cool references to real events and kind of really making you guess what is real and what's his invention in a way that I found very cool. So that's by an author named Tyler Kimball, who's also the guy who came up with the Mothership RPG, which has been getting a lot of good buzz lately. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, definitely check that one out if it sounds cool to you at all. It's pretty big, but the ebooks are on Amazon for very, very reasonable prices. So
I do like that mixing of fake and real history. I feel like Thomas Pynchon does that a lot, and it's always great because I feel like it sends you down rabbit holes that you wouldn't have known about otherwise, because you have to be like, is this real or not? Like, I need to look this up. Like,
yeah, definitely. And he like provides down like citations down to like like he's literally citing like texts he's pulling references from. Wow. So if you really like want to go awesome. Further down the rabbit hole, you could easily take the glossary from this book. And you could have like a whole reading list for like paranormal World War I topics you want to read about.
Man, that sounds great.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I always loved reading like kind of those encyclopedias, like paranormal stuff when I was like a kid. And this is the closest I feel like I've ever found a book that like scratches that same itch as an adult. So
yeah.
Well, glad we both had some fun, but it is time to get to fucking work.
School's back in session. The bell's ringing. Once again, we're drawn into the semester of the Infinite Library.
Ouch! Ben just rapped me on the knuckles with a ruler.
Yeah, it's time to pay attention.
Yes, Professor Ben.
Yeah, today we're discussing The Mysteries of Pittsburgh by Michael Chabon. Now, I feel like, as we hinted on the last episode, Michael Chabon's kind of like a lodestar, if you will, for this podcast because of the way that he frequently mixes genre and literary fiction. And I think he's got a keen interest in genre, which hopefully we can get into, but he also really likes, as he says, characters with stories or well-rounded characters in 3-act structure stories that have some sort of like revelation that happens at some point.
Beating around the bush, Ben. He literally says it in the afterword to this book. He likes bourgeois narrative.
Yeah, he loves The Great Gatsby. What a loser.
But as the person who suggested we kind of do this retrospective, I've been a fan of Chabon for a long time. I'd say I first kind of discovered him when the Yiddish Policemen's Union came out when I was in high school, because that book really took off with kind of sci-fi circles. It was like a Hugo nominee, might have won the Hugo. And at the time I was kind of making the jump from kind of literature for younger people to more serious literature. And his works like Yiddish Policemen's Union and Adventures of Cavalier and Clay were pretty impactful for me at that point and kind of showed me that reading literary fiction didn't have to be boring. It could have interesting like genre elements or just interesting conceits that kind of went beyond sort of the way that it's you receive literary fiction when you're kind of making that jump as a young person, which is like, oh, you liked reading books with dragons. What if you read a book about a guy being sad about his marriage?
Yeah, what if you read a book about divorce? yeah.
And it's like as a gentleman of letters now, of course, I know that you can have a lot of fun reading a book about a guy being sad about his marriage. But sometimes it's still fun to kind of have some of those genre elements in there. And I think what I really admire about Chabon is he's someone who clearly he has no shame in his influences. He is someone who's clearly very well read, very widely read, and loves a lot of different kinds of literature. We read his story way back on episode 4, the story he had in the Slipstream collection, which is clearly paying homage to like a lot of Lovecraft type stuff. Adventures of Cavalier and Clay is obviously him kind of riffing on comic books, but he never like comes across like a hack. He never comes across like he's just doing boring imitations of the people that he likes. He's always kind of taking these influences, these things he really loves, whether that's genre or literary or anything. And he's always putting like an interesting spin on it. And I think he's also honestly a really good prose stylist, which I think really was solidified for me with this book being his first novel. He really just is very talented and really can like make the words just kind of fly off the page, even when he's describing something fairly mundane.
Yeah, John, as he says also in the afterword, I didn't want to write science fiction or a version of science fiction, some kind of pierced and tattooed, doctorate-holding, ironical stepchild of science fiction, which, John, if we're being honest, probably describes a lot of the kind of genre stuff that's being published today.
Yeah, Michael Chabon coming out swinging, saying he doesn't want to be China Mieville.
But then he ends up saying China Mieville is actually pretty cool. So I think the man knows, like, he knows what he likes, as you said, and I think he's not afraid to like let that shine through, as opposed to like trying to disguise it, behind pretension.
I think what I really liked in the afterword of this book is that he is so open about that. The fact that he says that he read The Great Gatsby, he was reading In Search of Lost Time, and that's what inspired this book. And the fact that he does not seem to suffer from the anxiety of influence, as fellow patron saint of the show Harold Bloom would say, I think is interesting. And I think it is kind of symptomatic of the time Chabon is writing in, kind of the late 80s into the 2000s, where I think literature was shifting. People like these genre and literary circles were converging more and more often as people kind of fell in love reading one kind of thing and then got interested in other things as they got older. And as literature kind of ceased to be sequestered in quite the same way in kind of these very, very, prescribed circles. And
interestingly, he came from an MFA program, and like 80s MFA programs, which as far as I know, were a lot of like people trying to do like Carver minimalism. A lot of like, we're trying to go back and do Hemingway. We're going to tell stories about normal people having, the weight of their lives bear down on them, which Chabon also likes doing, but also he wants to have more fun than like 80s minimalism. And of course, like, I don't want to speak for all MFA programs in the 80s, but like David Foster Wallace kind of talks about this, where like the thing in the 80s was to be very minimal, and him kind of being like, well, what's my thing? Like, of course he went maximal, but I think like Chabon's really interesting because he's coming in the tail end and he's like, you know what? I like Great Gatsby. I like Philip Roth, but I also like sci-fi, detective fiction, Lovecraft, stuff that's usually associated with like childish reading. It's interesting that he says that, John, because like, can you imagine like how many kids read genre if they're reading it all today, as opposed to reading like YA fiction? Like the fact that like YA fiction is essentially like a genre, whereas like Chabon was just like, I'm gonna read like, I don't know, Philip K. Dick or like some other like Cosmos sci-fi, as opposed to read like did you read much YA fiction when you were growing up? I was thinking about how I read like a lot of fucked up YA fiction when I was growing up, like people getting like killed and murdered and like having like their lives ruined because they met a goblin. Like, I don't know why that was the kind of YA fiction I was reading, but like I read a lot of stuff like that. It was just like, I just remember being like, wow, this is dark, and then just like reading, going on to the next book.
Read some YA stuff. I think it's kind of weird because I think we, you and I are about the same age, so we would have kind of been, getting into this stuff around the same time, I'm sure. Listeners might be interested to know, Ben and I we're not born from the library. We actually didn't know it. Yeah.
We found it, actually. We found the library.
There have been benighted times in our lives where we were not constantly together. But I feel like YA was not what it is now when you and I were kind of in the prime YA years. I feel like I remember my experiences with YA being kind of like you said, much darker than I feel like the average kind of YA read is today, where it seems like YA now is kind of a marker of, this is a book that's quote unquote safe. So even if there is some kind of uncomfortable topic, it's going to be handled in a way that's like quote unquote age appropriate. Whereas I remember the YA series I always remember, because I enjoyed it a lot, was I believe it's called the Ugly series by Scott Westerfield, which I have not revisited in a long time, but I remember having a lot of pretty intense kind of subject matter in them, even if they are probably they kind of fall into that teen dystopia subgenre that was kind of the rage to tear apart a couple years ago. But I don't know. I think one of the reasons I also do like Chabon is that his experiences with reading feel very legible to me. They feel like how I read. You know, even when I was kind of in my again prime YA years, so to speak, I was still reading pretty broadly, even if maybe I was reading garbage. You know, I was reading a lot of like Dungeons and Dragons novels. I was reading a lot of like dark manga. I was reading Lovecraft. And so my palette, you know, was kind of always getting broader. And then I read, when I was like 14, 15 years old, I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman and The Gunslinger by Stephen King. And that was kind of the end of my YA phase. I was like, okay, there's better stuff out here. And I'm sure there was good YA I missed out on, and there's been good YA since I've missed out on, but that was kind of my jumping off point from that.
Yeah, and for me, the series I remember the most was, did you ever read anything by Jonathan Stroud, specifically the Bartimaeus trilogy?
I remember I picked up one of the Bartimaeus books from the library, but I remember not getting, like, it was due back before I got a chance to read it, and so I never actually got through it. But I always heard cool things about those books, and they're one that I kind of regret never getting to.
Well, it was crazy because, like, I feel like in those, there's kind of YA stuff I read was like, there would be like the normal, like, oh, I don't fit in. Oh, I'm a fucked up teen. I feel awkward. And then there would be like a conduit to hidden power that they would acquire. And rather than like becoming like a Harry Potter thing, something would go like horribly wrong. And in like, in the Jonathan Stroud books, like you get the perspective of a literal demon, and the demon does David Foster Wallace style footnote jokes, which I didn't put together until later, probably broke my brain so that I read so much David Foster Wallace, because like that sort of voice that comments on what's going on is like catnip if it's done comedically. And so like imagine there's like a demon, and the demon is doing David Foster Wallace style line break jokes, and then a literal British teenager summons the demon and then ends up just like fucking a ton of stuff up and like accidentally murdering a ton of innocent people, and like, but it's still somehow like a funny book. I don't know, like, anyway, like I feel like, as you were saying, John, I think like, yeah, Chabon is able to channel like formative reading experiences, and I feel like that's like really important for the kind of stories he wants to tell and the way that he mixes genre and literary fiction. And I think he's also like not someone who looks down on what he's done. He also like has done a lot of stuff. Like I had no idea that he had all those writing credits for that Mike Ronson album. The one that fucking the 2015 one, what was that called? Hold on, he had like 8 writing credits for that fucking album, which blows my mind. Fuck, the Uptown Funk album. It's crazy that Chabon has credits for that. Anyway, and he wrote for the Star Trek Picard show. Anyway, I think the guy knows what he likes, and he knows how to channel it. And I think us being people that read widely, I think it makes sense that we would dig him because we also do that. And I think rather than kind of being, you know, oh, I only read, I don't know, I only read Proust now. It's like, yeah, we'll still read like stories about goblins and stuff because we think they're cool. So, and I think for like trying to put that behind you doesn't make any sense to me. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I think even with what you were saying about Bartimaeus, I think that something that as I get older, I appreciate more and more is you can tell when a book was written by someone who really likes reading. And, you know, something I'm learning more and more as I try to write more and more is that a lot of, I'm kind of coming to like the David Lynch perspective where it's like, you don't fully decide what kind of art you make. There's something subconscious or like cosmic going on where you're kind of channeling something kind of beyond yourself or beyond kind of your conscious mind. And I think that some people like end up writing YA, but they might love David Foster Wallace and they might be trying to figure out, how do I bring that into writing YA? Yeah. And I think that is the type of writing I really admire. And I think that's the type of writing Chabon does. I think it's the writing a lot of people you and I both respect do. But I think that's kind of the sort of stuff that we really want to examine here on the show. It's like, how does kind of the wide world of literature, infinite as it is, how does it impact us and the writers we like talking about? So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Mysteries of Pittsburgh. So Mysteries of Pittsburgh. This is Michael Chabon's first novel. He wrote it over the summer of 1988, kind of as he was preparing to maybe enter a MFA program at UC Irvine. And it is kind of a Ben, before we started recording, you were saying this reminds you a lot of kind of the books, or not the books, but kind of the type of fiction you would maybe write, or you saw being written a lot back when you were taking creative writing classes.
Yeah, and I've only taken 2, but I had to write like a story for one of them. And I remember at the time, it was really important to me to sort of enchant my experience, like the enchantment of everyday experience, and the idea that you could make something as simple as the summer after your undergrad, but before the rest of your life, this sort of like magical discovery period where you would see things like factories that make clouds, hidden Pittsburgh neighborhoods. You would meet people that seemed like epic and, as he says, like starlets and heroes and movie stars. And it was really important to me to kind of write that way. And so I'd read it before, and I was reading again for this, and it really brought me back to that feeling of like, I want to tell this story as if it's like the most important thing ever. And I want the magic to come through, as opposed to writing something like, I don't know, social, like realist, or like, again, Chabon likes bourgeoisie novels, but something like Humdrum. And instead it felt like I wanted all the possibility to come back in to what I was doing at the time, or what I'm writing about, as opposed to whatever it was before. And that feeling really comes through on this book, even on a second reread.
Yeah. I think that one of the pieces of advice you get a lot as like a beginning author is like, write what you know. And I have mixed feelings about that as a piece of advice, because a lot of times you want to write about stuff that you don't have context for, and potentially could never have context for. But I think Chabon is kind of doing the best version of that. He's trying to take these very grounded, like, feelings that he seemed to be living through while he was writing this, these feelings of these relationships and the power they have, and kind of the world being made a stranger place by kind of the transitions you're going through in it. I think he really does the best version of that here. So before we get any deeper, I do want to talk a little bit about the title, because the title is something you and I,
of Pittsburgh.
kind of found a little puzzling when we got started with this book. So again, I kind of, knowing Chabon, I kind of knew that this was going to be some kind of riff on like genre fiction in some way, but from the title, I thought this was going to be like a detective novel or something like that. But no, it turns out that he's riffing on something totally different, which is a kind of defunct genre at this point called the city mystery, which you and I know both did like a little background reading on for this week. But more or less, it was a 19th century genre that started with a book called The Mysteries of Paris, which was, again, not like a detective novel, was kind of I guess you would almost kind of say kind of like a social novel genre that really focused on kind of the quote unquote like hidden or mysterious parts of a city. So things like crime, sex, poverty, depravity, the things that to sort of the bourgeois audience of kind of 19th century literature in France and the Anglosphere would have been kind of these much more like sequestered parts of the world they lived in. and there was kind of this idea of exposing, either to titillate or to inform, some of these darker corners of places that were otherwise everyday.
And there's some interesting parallels too between detective fiction, which would have started around that time, where the detective has to go from like middle or upper class to lower class to sort of show the underside of the city, and also like the ideas of the flaneur, which are very taken up by Baudelaire and by Poe, of the need to like walk in the city and be invisible in a crowd. And I think you can see kind of those anxieties in city mystery novels.
Yeah. And I think that Chabon, this is not quite a traditional entry in that genre, but I can definitely understand why he thinks, this is a good title for his novel, why he thinks he's working, tangentially to this, again, now kind of defunct genre. This book, when I first kind of read it and I kind of read what the title was about, I was like, how's he going to pull this off? And then as I
how is Pittsburgh mysterious? yeah.
But I think that he does a really good job kind of illustrating sort of a different kind of underworld, so to speak. I kind of kept thinking less in terms of underworld, more in terms of kind of demimonde. But I think that he's clearly referencing it in places, as we'll get to, but I think that he's working on kind of a more subtle level too that I really, really enjoy and that I found really cool.
Yeah, because there's like the wonder, and then there's like the like sort of seedy criminal element, and they're sort of both in the main character.
Yeah.
Kind of like there's his history that he's ignoring, which we can get into, and then there's this like these characters that he's meeting that's like the wondrous aspect.
So kind of to set up the basic kind of plot here, so we can get into our more detailed discussion as we generally do. We start with Mr. Art Bechstein, who, has been said, is a young man who has just completed his undergraduate education in economics at a university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Surprise, surprise. And he is kind of going through an experience I'm sure is not alien to our listeners, of kind of, you've graduated from college for the first time in your life. You are no longer kind of on the treadmill of school, summer vacation. All of a sudden, your life is kind of stretching out before you, and you find yourself less thrilled and more terrified.
Yeah.
And Art's kind of consternation is only increased by the fact that he has a very odd relationship with his father, who he has discovered a couple of years prior to this book's starting point, is not kind of a mild-mannered businessman, but is in fact a mild-mannered gangster who basically runs books for like the East Coast Mafia, more or less. And
I think we're getting the impression that there was a Jewish mafia, but now he runs books for like an Italian mafia. At least
they
in
were
the
consolidated. 80s. There was a merger at some point, but his father is also clearly like somewhat uncomfortable with his lifestyle, and is like, even though he knows Art knows what he does, he's very clearly tried to like make sure his son can have a normal life. He's paid for him to go to school. But he clearly is finding himself, that is the father, is getting more and more frustrated with the fact that Art is not like taking initiative, so to speak. And he is clearly, again, an experience I'm sure is not alien to most of our listeners. He's just kind of been overeducated, and it's left him kind of paralyzed and oversensitive and kind of dreamy and romantic, whereas his father clearly wants him to like be the legitimate like businessman or like successful person that the father cannot be.
Yeah, and I think I have a quote, this is early on the novel, that I think captures what you were saying, John. So this is very early. He's meeting with his father for dinner, and he says, he's speaking to himself, and then he finally says something to his father. It's the beginning of the summer, and I'm standing in the lobby of a 1,000-story Grand Hotel, where a bank of elevators a mile long and an endless red row of monkey attendants in gold braid wait to carry me up, 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 through the suits of moguls, of spies, and of starlets, to rush me straight to the Zeppelin mooring at the Art Deco summit, where they keep the huge dirigible of August tied up and bobbing in the high winds. On the way to the Shining Needle at the top, I will wear a lot of neckties. I will buy 5 or 6 works of genius on 45 RPM. And perhaps too many times, I will find myself looking at the snapped spine of a lemon wedge at the bottom of a drink. I said, I anticipate a coming season of dilated time and of women all in disarray. And then his father's like, stop talking like that. like his father just immediately berates him for talking in that dreamy way.
Yeah. So I guess there's not a great way to kind of get into the deeper plot than kind of to explain kind of our cast of characters, because this is definitely like a characters book more than it's a plot book. But the cast, so he starts off kind of, he meets sort of a handsome but aloof homosexual also named Arthur, who,
I gotta say, John, that meeting where they're outside the library and they're seeing a romantic like melodrama play out where a woman is supposed to choose between 2 men and there are like policemen there is like one of the best openings ever. Like they basically sort of like make eye contact as this is happening, and they like comment on it, and they just like immediately fall together. And like before they had been looking at each other in the librry, but like that like sort of melodramatic scene like starts the relationship.
Can you get a load of this?
Yeah, it's only like Pittsburgh,
Steel City,
and she like picks some guy, and everyone like I think people clap or something. Like it's like this like weird sort of like just everyday life in Pittsburgh scene, and then like the two of them are like kind of drawn together as they like observe it.
And so through Arthur, Arthur is kind of this slightly, like I said, aloof, like kind of like semi-aristocratic, almost like Gatsby-esque figure. He basically spends like all his summers like house sitting for various like strange people in kind of these immaculately appointed but like kind of weird houses. And he clearly like gives off this air of carelessness and enjoyment of sort of this intellectual milieu that Art feels kind of fraudulent in. But he's also refined too. He has manners. He's very aristocratic. And kind of through him, Arthur is brought into this kind of gradually widening, kind of demi-monde of people who at some level like have always been around him, but he had just kind of by happenstance never run into. And this is kind of what I meant when I was saying that he, this is kind of where that mystery aspect comes in. I think a lot of this book is kind of about the ways where a friend group kind of becomes its own like little world, and to come into a friend group kind of in the middle of that circle's lifespan, like can be this very mysterious thing. There's all this history, all these all this politics that you don't know anything about, and you feel like you know these people, but also like they're strangers, and you're kind of always trying to like act like you know people more than you do. Including the mysterious Cleveland. So one of the early scenes is Arthur kind of whisks Art away to a very cool party where there are a lot of foreign exchange students, and Art is kind of dazzled by all of the people at this party. And at the party, we're introduced to both Jane, who is this sort of like, how would you describe Jane? Sort of like, she doesn't get a lot of play in the rest of the book, but she's initially presented as like this
like, oh man, it's Jane. Like, she's drunk, she's hitting golf balls like into houses at this party. Everyone is like watching her, and Art is like immediately stricken by her. And eventually they talk, and it's revealed that there's a third to this relationship, Cleveland, who is in some ways like the polar opposite.
Yeah, so
of
I think
Arthur.
Jane is very much kind of like the it girl. And I agree. It's kind of odd. I do think maybe one of the weaker points of the novel is the fact that she really does just drop out at a certain point. And yeah, I don't know if Chabon fully knew what to do with her, especially as we kind of get into some of the other characters in the book who I think kind of steal a little spotlight from her. But really the important thing here is Cleveland, who is kind of Cleveland and Arthur go way back. They have clearly known each other for years, and Arthur is kind of always talking about Cleveland and kind of all the crazy things Cleveland gets up to.
He rode a horse into a pool. We're told at one point.
Cleveland is this archetype that I don't even necessarily have like a name for, but he's clearly like, he's a cad. You know, he's a guy who is kind of, everything he does is kind of just about kind of building up this legend of himself. And he is liberated in this way that to the very neurotic Art seems incredibly enticing, but also incredibly distant.
Yeah, many theatrical gestures, many just sort of like flying in the face of like authority or decency, kind of like those sort of things, like saying exactly what he means to say at every moment.
You know, I think we'll get into kind of some of the thematics here in a little bit, but key to Cleveland is that his mother committed suicide and his father has since come out as gay. And you know, there's some speculation that, you know, some of this is at the root of his bad behavior, so to speak. One of the last things that comes up here, we mentioned a library earlier. Arthur works at the library, and through this connection at the library, he introduces Art to one more person who is the improbably named Phlox.
Phlox Lombardi.
She's a BPD art hoe in 1988.
Yeah, she's the 1988 equivalent of a BPD art hoe. We're told very early on that she does not have the genius for humor, so most of what she says is a quote of something else.
Hundreds of obscure quotes that she'll just drop in to conversations to get a rise out of people, which, as someone who does that from time to time, I appreciated. But Arthur sets up Art with Phlox. There's
because Phlox has sort of like seen Art, and been like, that one. And so like Arthur with his genius for gestures and social graces is like, well, of course I'll arrange the two of you should meet.
There's an implication at the beginning that Art has also noticed Phlox. At the very least, at this one day in the library, she works behind the bars, and he sees her kind of before he meets Arthur, and kind of has this just kind of striking aesthetic experience. She's behind like these kind of white washed wrought iron bars. She's wearing a aqua ribbon in her hair. You know, Phlox was a character who, again, I I did have a name for her archetype, but she was probably my favorite character. Either her or Arthur was my favorite character. But she just felt very well drawn to me in a way that some other characters didn't. Cleveland is a character who I think is fairly well written, but he never quite rounds out as much as I think I would have liked him to.
Especially since the novel kind of almost as if remembering has a lot of stuff with him towards the end, as if to go, oh yeah, he's also just important as Arthur and Phlox.
I get what Chabon was trying to do there in terms of kind of what these three characters end up representing to Art. But I just never found their relationship to be quite as credible, especially since so much of Art's relationship with Cleveland does end up actually kind of revolving around Arthur in a way.
They do have that one scene where they go to a bar and get super drunk and like talk about poetry, which I thought was also a gesture I recognized from my early attempts at writing. And then Cleveland goes, "I like you, Arthur," or Art. I'm gonna keep confusing him. "I like you, Art," and then Art like starts crying, and Cleveland goes, "Ah, come on, I don't like you that much," which like is like an incredible, just like really funny scene. And then he eats a ton of pickled eggs, which made me really jealous that you could just get pickled eggs at a bar. Like I would eat those all the time if that was the case. Like they act like that's a thing you can get anywhere, and I'm like, oh, I missed that.
Only in Pittsburgh, baby. Where did all the pickled eggs go?
Yeah. Pickled eggs
in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
they're all in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, in every bar. Okay, I'm going to Pittsburgh to get pickled eggs. Then clearly, I actually will say the one time I was in Pittsburgh, we went to this bar called like the Nut Cage or something, and it was an incredible bar. So like, they didn't have pickled eggs, but it was awesome. So. But okay, so I had something I wanted to say, which was Phlox Lombardi. So Phlox Lombardi is sort of like immediately kind of, they get together with Art, and then Art also works at Boardwalk Books, which is described as if it was a store that very unfortunately happened to sell books and not like meat or cheese, because the books are like stacked kind of haphazardly underneath fluorescent lighting in this sort of like dystopian kind of like meat packing space, and Art is forced to kind of scuttle around the bookstore. Oh, this is the thought I had. So notice that in this book, a lot of characters, Art sees a lot of characters framed. He sees Phlox framed through the window, and he has the aesthetic experience you talked about. He is constantly looking out the window of Boardwalk Books to see like his friends in his life, and they're always like presented as if they're in like a movie, and he goes, "Who are these wonderful people?" And I found that framing seemed to be really interesting because, one, it recalls the scene from Great Gatsby where that one woman who eventually seduces Daisy's husband sees him on the train, and she says, "It was like I was looking at a advertisement," and there's like an advertisement for the perfect man above Daisy's husband when she sort of sinks Daisy's husband. Now, I don't know if Chabon internalized that scene, but there's a really interesting sort of like the image of success that Art is constantly seeing in his friends. The image of the aesthetic experience, the image, which I thought was like an interesting sort of preoccupation of the book, is like looking at something and being like, "Oh, am I a part of this?"
Yeah,
and sort of just being like shocked that you are.
Again, the book is kind of about like the ways that like people like understand and misunderstand each other, I think. And I think that, again, it felt very real to me in that way. Yeah. And that Art is someone who kind of does not feel like he does not understand himself as like the protagonist of his own reality. If everyone else around him seems to have this like real quality that he feels he's lacking somehow, and he doesn't know like what he's missing. Right. And it might have something to do with like his Jewishness. I think it's pretty important in the context of this book that he is the only one of these kind of people who is Jewish and kind of comes from a background that is sketchy at best. But it's also kind of about the ways that that same kind of like fundamental weakness, which I actually think is pretty universal to the human experience. How it leads us to actually apart. Miss things about people and miss the ways that they're kind of doing the same thing. One of the scenes I really like in the book is towards the end, where Art is over at one of the houses Arthur is staying over at, and Arthur's mother arrives, and she has like brought him like some shirts that she's mended for him. And she is not, as you would kind of expect, this, aristocratic, fancy, rich woman. She is in fact a house cleaner. And Art is actually like, he did have this kind of fancy private school education, but he was a scholarship kid. He is not actually the type of person he puts on airs to be, except insofar as he is confident enough to put on those airs.
Yeah, and also another Gatsby parallel is when you find out that Gatsby isn't really Gatsby, and he's just some like Midwestern guy. Like he's not this glamorous gangster. He's just a guy that's largely his own invention. And so, Art is sort of like, and this is also when Art and Arthur are surprised seeing each other. They're in a relationship. So Art is like seizing this opportunity to find more about Arthur. And as you said, John, we're told, suddenly like it's like sort of everyone's pretending, including the aristocratic. Well,
it's interesting too, because I think there's an element
Arthur
here where it's kind of occurring to me now that I'm thinking about it more. There's an interesting gender element here, where Art kind of immediately clocks all the ways that Phlox is very obviously like performative. The fact that she is kind of constantly performing like this very idiosyncratic like form of femininity that involves. Yes. Oh my gosh. There's a great
French. She's a French major.
Girls who major in French that maybe we'll insert here because it's. That was one of my most favorite parts of the book. I was cracking up reading that at work, and people were asking me what I was laughing at, and I had to hope that no one in my office majored in French. But
but your Gen X coworker knew.
But he is almost oblivious to the way that Arthur or Cleveland are kind of performing in the same way, because he views them as peers in a way. And he's so desperate for kind of this feeling of like male companionship that he it seems that he's lacked for a lot of his life. It's interesting. His relationship with his father is interesting because they clearly do care about each other, but they treat it like seeing each other as like kind of a job for them. They kind of have it down. Restaurants and movie theaters.
They only meet in restaurants.
Art's father will come down for like a couple days, and he'll take him out for like a big fancy dinner. But they have it kind of down to the point where like when his father calls, they can like kind of sort out the whole thing in like 2 minutes because they've had the same conversation over and over again. And it seems like he's looking for kind of this sense of male companionship that has been cut off to him in some way, but he just cannot seem to see the way that he's doing the same thing, that these people are doing the same thing that he clearly sees women doing in a way that's interesting.
I admit I have an ugly fondness for generalizations, so perhaps I may be forgiven when I declare that there is always something weird about a girl who majors in French. She has entered into her course of study, first of all, knowing full well that it can only lead to her becoming a French teacher, a very grim affair, the least of whose evils is poor pay, and the prospect of which should have been sufficient to send her straight into the business or public relations. She has been betrayed into the study of French, heedless of the terrible consequences, by her enchantment with this language, which has ruined more young American women than any other foreign tongue. So, chapter 9, and then it goes on to say that French literature is one of the most destructive forces known to mankind. As she begins to relish such previously unglamorous elements of her vocabulary, such as longère and funeste. I'm sure I'm butchering those, but... Anyway, also, there's that scene where she reads the story of O and then jacks off Art. What did you think about that?
I found that scene to be interesting. I think that I'm gonna be kind of frank here with you, Ben. I think there's some Freud going on in this book.
Definitely some Freud.
And I think that it was an interesting kind of a portrayal of the weird way like fantasy can work, because Art immediately like ends that scene by telling her that he's not going to flog her, and she like cracks up at that. And so I think there's kind of this interesting thing where like the sharing of the fantasy is more intimate and like sexier than the idea of actually experiencing the fantasy in a way that I enjoyed. And I think, again, kind of comes down to sort of this thing where Phlox is someone who, I mean, I don't want to say she doesn't like the story of O, but she wants people to understand her as someone who likes the story of O.
Yeah, it felt like this very intimate gesture from her that Art sort of like still reads as performative somehow at the end. Like, I mean, I think it
is and it isn't, because I think that, again, the way I read Phlox, at least, is that sharing the performance in this way is like an intimate act for her. The fact that he's kind of letting Art that deep into the performance and letting him kind of see that there is a performative element to it. The fact that she's not like totally unself-conscious of like her sexuality, I think is like kind of its own form of intimacy.
Which is, that's what the part of the big argument that they have is about.
Yeah.
Where they all like meet for dinner. They're talking about how Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run, is the most Roman Catholic album ever made, which I want to say, like, I kind of wish there was a little bit more of that in the book. Like, I know he's going for the wonder and the descriptions of stuff, but the fact that like he just sort of gives us one bit about their conversation, which is like, oh, you know, Born to Run is like really Catholic. But anyway, like at one point, like it's like, oh, you can't know some parts about a woman. There's some part of her that's fundamentally secretive. And Phlox is like, no, there's not. like I'm eminently knowable, and that ends up like being like this sort of argument where Arthur like ends up basically insulting her, and then like Art has to choose between his friends and her at the end, and the dinner kind of ends disastrously.
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, again, it's interesting. I kind of to circle back to something I said earlier. I think what Chabon is kind of getting at here is the ways in which, you know, people are unknowable to each other. I think that in a way, like Phlox's like belief that she is imminently knowable actually is just kind of another level of unknowability. But it's not about her gender. It's about the fact that we never learn like kind of why she is the way she is. Why is she performative in this way? Why does she want people to view her in this way, other than that it's, you know, kind of quirky and sexy and interesting? You know,
she talks about it like she had like a punk period, and then she maybe had like a Roman Catholic period.
She had her seamstress period. You know, the ways in which she tries to kind of constantly be so legible and in a way makes her more mysterious, because she's constantly like shoving certain things in your face in this way that feels like it's kind of supposed to be distracting from something else.
Especially the Mau Mau reference that
she
was
so
once
weird.
known as Mau Mau. And she's like, don't ever call me that.
But, you know, I've been, I don't know if it's come up on the show too much. I know I've made the occasional reference to The Good Doctor, but I've been kind of coming back to the works of Freud for the first time since I was in my own undergrad over the last couple months. And, you know, so one of the things I find is really interesting about psychoanalysis, and one of the reasons I kind of like psychoanalytic readings of things, is that psychoanalysis, kind of one of the core things that it notices about the human condition is that we don't even fully understand our own kind of drives and our own reasons for doing things. You know, there's kind of always this element of like perversity in us, this element of like, you know, there's these things that are so far back in our psyche, whether they're like primal human things or they're like based in things that happened to us before we were fully conscious, or, you know, some other thing. You know, there's always kind of stuff going on in the background that we're not fully conscious of. And I think that like Chabon is so good at kind of picking up on that in people in this book.
Yeah.
The various ways that everyone is acting, and in some ways is like trying to act very consciously in certain ways, but doesn't really understand why they're doing it. And
which is perfect for post college summer, where you're
yes,
like,
absolutely.
am I supposed to be doing this? Yeah.
You know, Cleveland, I think, is probably one of the best examples of that in the book, because he is the character who kind of has the most dramatic downfall, so to speak.
Yeah.
Cleveland, you know, is aimless at the beginning of the book, but kind of becomes actively self-destructive as it goes on. And he pressures Art into introducing him to his dad so that he can kind of make connections with the local mafia. And he ends up becoming a jewel thief, and then ends up getting caught, and then ends up dying trying to escape from the police.
And he specifically gets caught because his Art's father basically is mad that he met Cleveland, and that Art is messing around with the wrong kind of people. And it's hinted that, like, why didn't Art's dad just teach his own son a lesson and not this Cleveland guy? That he's in some ways like projecting or another psychoanalytic term. He's like projecting what he should be doing to Art onto someone else to still protect his son from what he views as like the disagreeable elements of, you know, him, the criminal stuff.
Yeah. And it's definitely, again, the point where the kind of mystery novel, the city mystery novel, really gets drawn more in. You know, there's a pretty fun scene where they kind of barge into a mafia meeting, and rather than what you're expecting, it sounds kind of like a kind of side scene in The Sopranos where they're all dressed like shit and they're like about to go golfing.
It's very Sopranos. Yeah, it's very Sopranos. There's even, I feel like, a freeze frame where like the narrator gives us information about someone, like they froze on the gangster and was like, this guy's name, this is what he does. Like there's even like the text even kind of does that for a minute.
Yeah. But it is this point where Art is kind of intruding on like the world of the father, and you know, he has to be kind of violently like shoved back out, because there is this like unbridgeable gap here, because the father does not want him. Like, the father knows how dangerous his world is, and is, you know, there's an intimation that Art's mother is dead when the book begins, and Art actually only learns about his father's business after his mother dies. And there's an intimation that maybe his mother was killed in kind of another one of these like transference assassinations, where Art's father should have been whacked, but, you know, they decided to teach him a lesson instead and killed his wife. And so, you know, there's this element where Art is not taking like his father's sacrifices seriously enough for his father, and so there has to be a lesson, and it becomes Cleveland who, you know, for his own reasons, you know, they make a lot of the fact that Cleveland's life kind of being a tragedy thus far, between his mom committing suicide, his dad being gay, he nearly like kills his sister in like a fit of rage when he's like 15, and, you know, it's basically Cleveland's life had been so tragic that no one ever expected anything from him again. And so Cleveland's just like, he's chasing this idea of like bigness, which is just kind of this, kind of libido with no meaningful outlet. It's just kind of this idea of like just energy that you're just putting everywhere and just trying to like expand and take up as much space as you can. And
well, he says at one point, like, I'm going to eat the entire world. He says that at one point to Art. Also, importantly, he kind of forces Art to confront the criminal aspect by taking him on his collection route, because before it becomes a jewel thief, he's basically just like a collections guy for a middle manager between, you know, him and Art's dad. There's probably more middle managers, but basically he has to just do pickups.
He's one of those guys who, like, in like the early seasons of The Sopranos, who's like wearing a bad suit and like trying to figure out how he can convince Christopher to like let him like run numbers on something.
Yeah, or he's also like Mikey Grabbag, like he's Mikey Grabbag from season 1, where Mikey just gets whacked like horribly, like in the middle of the forest at the end for going beyond his ken, essentially. Like, yeah,
but Cleveland is clearly someone who does not know like what he actually wants in life, and like at some level has been kind of had his like ego crippled in such a way that like he can't want anything concrete. He has to like find a way to like make this tragedy that his life has been make sense, and there's no way to do that in kind of like modern bourgeois society. So he's just trying to figure out like how to go out big in some way, and it's no surprise that he like ends up becoming a jewel thief. It's like, oh, that sounds romantic, and then you find out, oh yeah, it's actually just like breaking into like suburban houses and like pawing through people's jewelry boxes. It's not exciting or sexy. It's actually incredibly like weird and gross and dangerous. And
and like, he's also like an alcoholic, and Art says at one point like the alcoholic's death is the most prepared for event in his life or something like and so like also I like the implication that Cleveland was like educated in like a school, like a good school. So like he kind of had some setup for success, but he's like Arthur accuses him. He's like, Cleveland used to write in those days. And like Cleveland's like, yeah, we don't talk about that or something. Like he wrote some like 25,000 word essay about cockroaches that he lived with. Or so like there's some nice like sort of, glimpses into this sort of genius of Cleveland, but it is kind of like this, like sort of libido flame out basically.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to touch on, because I do think it's important to the book, and I feel like
I had one more thing. Sorry. So I think we could also map Arthur and Cleveland onto the city mysteries novel genre, because Arthur is the upper class wonder, the sort of refined social grace, even though he's pretending, the sort of like the wonderment element. And while Cleveland is associated with that, a lot of Art's interactions with Cleveland involve looking at like the stakes, like what basically his father sits upon, which is like extorting money from working class people. Yeah. And like Cleveland chooses to do this, and he chooses to show Art this. And so in a way, Art gets the city mystery genre through both of his friends, who are then sort of like also reflections of himself, as he says later at the end, where Arthur is sort of like me sort of pretending and sort of keeping my distance from people while sort of playing this aristocratic role, whereas Cleveland is like the guy that always says exactly what's on his mind and sort of like will ride the horse into the pool if he thinks it's like a good gesture.
Well, and I think something else that's interesting with Cleveland is that he, I think through a lot of the book, is actually reading Art in the same way Art reads other people. He is kind of constantly pressuring Art, like, you got to let me meet your dad. You have all these connections. You're so connected. How can you not like care about like the opportunities that this opens up for you, like knowing all these like dangerous men? And Art's like, I don't really want to talk about that. And it's kind of the same way that Art kind of won't let people be to some degree, the way that he kind of is not necessarily prodding at people's like projections, but kind of is just constantly like involving himself in their projections. I think Cleveland kind of provides an interesting counterpoint where Arthur and Phlox, we don't get quite as clear an idea of like what their idealized vision of Arthur is in the same way that we do with Cleveland, where Cleveland wants something from Arthur. Doesn't mean he doesn't care about him, but there is kind of this instrumentalism in the same way Art is kind of using the Arthur and Phlox and Cleveland to build this image of himself as someone who's kind of in this exciting, sexy circle.
John, would you accept the reading that Cleveland is Art's id and Arthur is his superego?
Maybe. I don't dislike that.
Just because the way we've been talking about will to bigness is sort of like, the libido that must be exhausted.
Yeah,
the thing
they're
is,
like a trio.
Yeah, they're actually, a trio. The thing is, though, like, Art wants to merge with his superego, which is why he ends up sleeping with Arthur, to sort of, like, become, like, this refined version of himself, but you can't really do that, so that's why it sort of, like, doesn't work out.
Well, Ben, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one thing I feel like we haven't actually covered a lot, and I do think it is actually pretty important to the novel, and I think actually something that's maybe something about Chabon that doesn't get talked about enough is, you know, this is a queer novel. Like, this is a pretty like unflinching look at, I guess, like being bi in 1988. So Art is, you know, at the start of the book, like, he has just gotten out of like a relationship with what sounds like another BPD-arto.
Claire, I think was her name. Yes. Claire.
And, you know, there's like this initial like feeling of he's very like enchanted with Arthur as soon as they meet, but he's not really ready to like take the leap into being gay in any way. Like, you know, he still has this kind of just cringe away from anything homosexual. And again, Arthur, some degree, like, good on him, is like, you know what? I understand. Let me set you up with a beautiful woman instead.
A beautiful BPD-arto.
But kind of over the course of the book, we kind of see their relationship develop. And I actually thought that the relationship between the two of them, I thought was a very kind of, I don't know if I want to call it sweet, but I really liked the connection they had. It felt very genuine in a way. And you know, they do eventually kind of get together and have like, kind of this very like kind of sweet domestic relationship for a period of the summer, until crucially, like, Arthur has to move out of the house he's house sitting, and he moves into Art's apartment. And then it, like, basically as soon as there's kind of, they lose some of that enchantment. They kind of start to lose interest in each other.
Like 3 strained days or something is like what like the sentence says. Crucially.
But, you know, Ben, you brought this up before we started the show. Something that is really interesting in this, and it is one of those things where it's like, oh, I guess we have made some social progress in the last 40 years or whatever. But something that is like a big theme in this novel is sort of the way that to be bi is kind of to feel like pulled between two worlds, or at least it can if you're kind of tied up in monogamy, I guess. But Art is clearly like he's attracted to both Phlox and Arthur. He at one point is like, I love both of you. Why can't we just like figure out how to all like each other?
And then also that's the moment where he's basically in the scene that he witnesses in the opening.
Yeah, exactly.
Where like he's basically like torn between both Phlox and Arthur, and he has to pick one. And he says, "Why can't we just do both?" And both of them are like, we both know that's bullshit." Like basically, like we can't do that. And Arthur crucially says, like, if you're gay, you're only gay. And Phlox, as I said, before, says like he wants to have disgusting gay sex with my artichoke, which is an incredible line, like just for Phlox to say it all. Like, and so like, in some ways, like in 1988, like being bi was like, it was like you're on both sides as opposed to like something that you can be. Yeah,
I guess we're still probably a couple years out from that Time magazine cover with all the bisexuals.
Yeah. Well, and Chabon was kind of sold initially as a gay author, and in you can read interviews about that, and he's like, I don't think I'm really a gay author. Like, I wrote about something that happened to me, and I wrote about a thing you can be, but like I'm not gonna say like I am this, and sort of like it's an interesting way that he sort of handles that to me, because like I think he had been identified as like an up and coming gay author, and he was just kind of like, okay, sure. Like he didn't like rush out of his way to sort of say like, no, that's not me.
Well, I think it's interesting because again, Chabon, I don't know if he like what he publicly IDs as today. I wouldn't be surprised if he still considered himself bi. It also wouldn't surprise me if he had a different take. he's pretty open about the fact that like he is married to a woman now, and like he's not like doing both things at this point. But you know, I think that there is an element where I don't know, sometimes it can be weird to be like a bi person in a monogamous like relationship of either sex, because it's like you do feel like there is this element where it's like, well, I'm only read as the one thing for the most part. So does that make me basically that? And I found, just kind of the discomfort with that in the context of like 1988 very interesting, particularly like Phlox's reaction, because Phlox comes across like the type of person who would be like pro-gay, but is aggressively disgusted by homosexuality. And maybe it's just that type has kind of evolved since then. Maybe this is kind of before the fag hag was like a fully embraced like cultural archetype. And maybe it's just the fact that, you know, she can sense this in Arthur or in Art, and she's jealous, and she can only kind of express it in homophobic language.
Especially speaking of Freud, that letter that she gives Art, like after he sort of sleeps with Arthur the first time, is like a lot of Freudian like double speak, where she talks about like how hard it is to be betrayed and then to be come up from behind. It's like something she says, like, and like Cleveland reads it when he's like really stoned, and he's like, that's pretty good or something like. So like, there's a lot of John, I think there is a lot of Freud in this in terms of like your doppelganger wanting to be your doppelganger, the sort of tension between heterosexuality and homosexuality as like, I don't know, mutually oppositional things, for at least in this book.
Did you notice that Art is one of the things he's kind of doing with this summer is he's working on a paper on a series of letters by Freud, which is where my little antenna went up. And then it just kept pinging through the rest of the book almost constantly.
Your Freud antenna. There's also a lot of like interesting literature references. Like at one point when Art is like working and sort of concerned with being gay, he sees Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet, who is like this sort of groundbreaking gay author. And that book particularly is about like what you think about when you jack off in prison as a gay man. And it's just sort of like sort of fantastical menagerie of fantasy that like you think about if you're in prison. And again, it's like interesting that like Chabon picked that book to be like basically like Art is walking around and he goes, I didn't know we had a copy of this in Boardwalk Books. Like, and it's sort of like this again, like Chabon is very good at like sort of, he's clearly read a lot of stuff, as we said, and he just kind of puts the right references in like places that like real heads would know about. So
well, I like it from the standpoint that again, I think we all kind of have that experience where, again, it's not actually anything cosmic going on, but it's just like you look at the books you see and like the art you experience like through the lens of like what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
And so if he was going through something else, he probably wouldn't have noticed that book. But because he's coming to grips with the fact that he's kind of gay, he's going to notice the gay books.
Yeah, and like there's that scene where he's like sort of describing it in terms of like a science fiction movie where everything is off, which felt like a very Chabon description, where you're just kind of like, oh, everything is wrong now that the science fiction aliens have taken over, but that's me sort of like noticing things that are gay. So I do want to say, we've kind of talked about the characters and sort of the themes of the novel and as they play out. And when John mentioned this at the top, I do find his prose to be kind of intoxicating at times. And there's one particular thing that I wanted to mention, one quote, where we're getting this nice sort of like thumbnail sketch of Arthur. And Art says, essentially, I laughed, but Arthur stood straight, looked deeply, beautifully sympathetic for perhaps 1/10 of a second, and nodded. With that fine, empty courtesy he seemed to show everyone. He had an effortless genius for manners, remarkable perhaps just because it was unique among people his age. It seemed to me that Arthur, with his old, strange courtliness, would triumph over any scene he chose to make, that in a world made miserable by frankness, his handsome condescension, his elitism, and his perfect look of candor were fatal gifts, and I wanted to serve in his corpse and be socially graceful. And I think like that you get the sense of Gatsby being a man out of time. You get Arthur being a man out of time. You also get very particular choices of adjectives and nouns. And elsewhere, I don't have examples, but I feel like Chabon just lifts the synesthesia prose from Gatsby. There's a scene for Gatsby where they describe cocktail music as yellow, which I remember as a particular teacher going, what? Like, why is cocktail music yellow? And so we spent like a lot of time talking about that particular line as like, he's actually doing weird stuff prose-wise. Fitzgerald was. But you can see Chabon kind of do that in his own way. There's a description of chili that smells red, as well as yellow summers that are particularly yellow. And I think like, without coming across as corny, I think Chabon is particularly gifted at getting just the right amount of enchantment, and you can kind of see that in the Arthur description, and you can see that in many other cases, like where they go to the cloud factory, which appears to be a factory that just makes perfect clouds because they can't determine like what the purpose of the factory is. And I think, you know, you kind of see that in a lot of Chabon stuff because he's just like, you know, preternaturally good. But I found this sort of like links to Gatsby to be quite fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I don't have much else to say beyond that. I totally agree with you. I thought that this book, like the prose really flew off the page for me. You know, I kind of always mark, like for me, the mark of really excellent prose is when I am reading like it faster than a page a minute, but I also feel like I'm totally absorbing like what's going on the page. Like I just enter like a flow state.
Yeah.
Where I'm it's like I'm cruising through the book at like this breakneck pace, but like I'm getting the full like experience. Like I'm not losing things in there. It's just like it's all like washing over me as like my imagination just kind of like is running the film, and like I'm seeing everything they're talking about. And I think that Chabon in this book does a really good job getting me into that state.
And I think I mentioned this before, but I find at least in this and Wonder Boys, there's this initial rush that starts to wear off once the machinations of the plot and the ending sort of come lumbering into view.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about how I think we both kind of don't exactly the way this all wraps up.
Yeah. You know, so let me say that as someone who's tried to write a novel before, and I feel like my novel, if I'd ever finished it, would have had a similar pacing issue. I kind of get how it happens because endings are they're kind of just by their nature, they're the thing you always have the least experience with as a writer. And I think from the standpoint that he started this book, you know, based on kind of what he says in the afterwards, he started this with not exactly like a solid timeline, but there was kind of this idea of like, this is something I'm going to do like over a very distinct period of time. And I'm not going to drag it out.
June, July, and August. Yeah. June, July, August.
And so I think looking at it like that, it's like he's trying to just finish a novel because he wants to write a novel, and to do that, you have to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And I think that this is a book that this could be 500 pages. I'm not saying it would be as good if it was 500 pages, but kind of the dynamics he sets up with these characters are ones that have plenty of room for more to happen between them. Especially if, again, you kind of bring in some of those characters like Jane who don't get a lot of play, and maybe we find a way to flesh that out a little bit more. I don't know what you would do exactly, but you know, this book could have gone on longer, but I definitely get the idea of it's like, okay, I got to wrap this thing up so that I have a completed project in front of me. On that level, it makes sense to me. But I agree with you from the standpoint that I don't like the ending particularly. It feels a little bit, it feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere. And then I really did not kind of like, it feels like it kind of has like a more fantastical tone than the rest of it in a weird way, where all of a sudden, like, so Cleveland dies and
because of Art's dad.
And then Arthur ends up like getting threatened by other like mafia people. And so Art and him decide to like flee Pittsburgh, and they end up in Europe somehow. And
they do what every Gen X person dreams of, John, which is going to Europe. Yeah,
but the intimation is kind of all of a sudden that Art is writing kind of a reminiscence of this summer and like kind of how it brought him to kind of the unhappy state he's in now.
Yeah.
But I just kind of, didn't buy it from the standpoint that just like how I just don't really believe these two could make it to Europe and like kind of, it took on like this almost picaresque quality that I just was not a fan of, and that I didn't think the novel set up well enough.
And like, so one, they go to Europe, but they end up like splitting apart in Europe. Like it said, like Arthur goes to somewhere else and he's there and he's fine with leaving Arthur. Two, Arthur sort of like accuses him earlier in the book and says like, you're supposed to be doing something frivolous. Why aren't you doing something frivolous, being like the son of a gangster? And like Art is like stoned. He doesn't know what to say. And so like, it almost seemed like to me reading it, it seemed like Art like lapses into like frivolousness, where he's just like, yeah, I'll go to Europe. Like, who knows how he's paying for it, but it's kind of frivolous. So they do the like Gen X European vacation, and then the thing just like ends in sort of melancholy and like Proustian reflection, where it's just kind of like, man, that summer was pretty good. Like, you know, like we had some times, didn't we? Like, that's how it feels like at the end. And there are times when I'm reading this book and I'm like seeing the real Chabon writing this book, and then I'm seeing like Art, and I feel like in the ending suddenly the two like split really distinctly, where suddenly like you can see the real Chabon moving the pieces around, and suddenly like we're giving Art like this, man, you know, things were good then, now they're not, you know, whereas before like you could imagine like Chabon writing that. There's maybe a version of this that has like a more, like you had said fantastical, but a more like I don't know, happier fantastical ending. So I think choosing to end on the downbeat is good, but it feels very like engineered. It feels very like I can see
it's kind of this
moving.
Weird thing where it's like like you said, the kind of thing is like making Pittsburgh this kind of, giving it this aura, making this kind of magical place. And then all of a sudden, like they run off to Europe, and it's not like more enchanted or magical, but it's like Pittsburgh's real. And it's like Europe is just kind of this floating signifier. And there's no intimation that like there's anything real there. I don't know. It just felt very like hollow and kind of corny. And again, kind of like on this heightened level that I don't think the book earned, as it's trying to do like the downbeat ending. The downbeat ending is like they moved to Toledo. Yeah.
I like the idea also, like maybe there's a version where they find a secret door in the lost neighborhood and they just escape totally into fantasy, and it's sort of like they're like withdrawing into non-reality. Actually, going to Toledo would be great, because then you could say something like there might be mysteries in Toledo. And it just,
well, it's interesting actually, because something I was kind of, I don't know, say I was preparing for, but I kept wondering throughout the book. I wondered if all the mafia stuff was going to be kind of a misdirection. Like this is something Arthur has told himself about his father, to kind of cover up some deeper or just less interesting reality.
See, that would have been the real bourgeoisie novel. If it's been like suddenly we find out that it's actually not, he's not really a gangster.
I don't know if that's necessarily what I want, but it was like kind of this thing where, again, like all the gangster stuff kind of just gets very real in a way that it did not feel through most of the book, where it's kind of this very floaty thing. And I guess that works, because that's kind of what Chabon's trying to do, is he's trying to actually draw you into kind of the seedy underbelly in a way that before it's kind of about the wonderment, and now we're going to get into like the seediness and the depravity. But I just don't quite think he sticks the landing. But this is a first novel, like, hey, I can't judge too harshly.
And maybe too, like that's kind of going back to the genre literary thing, like maybe the genres that he's working with, like the the gangsters have to kind of like take over
maybe
in some way.
I've never actually read any of those city mystery novels. They actually sounded kind of enervating. Just like really one of those things where it's just like, oh man, these were being serialized in newspapers, and so they're all like 800 pages of basically nothing happening.
Well, but that description you had sent was of that guy getting like his guts torn open and blown up. I was like, that's like an action.
Yeah, but you have to read
like
800 pages of nothing happening to get to that.
Yeah, that's true. It's probably not worth it. But just a giant explosion at the very end of 800s of like, oh, look at the poor people. like isn't it sad the way that they exist? Yeah, like that would just be that.
Well, Ben, do you have anything else you want to say about Mysteries of Pittsburgh? Obviously, we're going to have a lot more to say about Chabon in general.
Yeah. I actually have one last line. I wanted to read you this quote, John, and I wanted to see if this applies to the Mysteries of Pittsburgh. When it comes to conventions, their central impulse is not to flout or to follow them, but flouting or following to play. Whether through willfulness, ignorance, or simple proper love, what tends to be ignored by serious writers and critics alike is that genre, known more imprecisely than the other as literary fiction, has rules, conventions, and formulas of its own. The primacy of a unified point of view, for example, letters and their ability to being read or intercepted, the dance of adulterous partners, the buried family secret that curses generations to come, the ordinary heroism of an unsung life. Does that last thing seem like a description of Mysteries of Pittsburgh to you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I read that, and Chabon is writing this years later after writing Mysteries of Pittsburgh. But I like that you can see each one of those conventions in Mysteries of Pittsburgh. Phlox's letter, the buried father history, the adulterous partners, and even, I don't know about the unsung one. That's the one that I think is maybe not in Mysteries of Pittsburgh, but most of those are. Yeah,
this is something I'm sure we're going to get into as we get into this season and kind of get into I think what we're discovering kind of our interest in what talking about what the show is. But I think that genre is interesting because genre conventions don't come from nowhere. They're still grounded in like human experience, but kind of heightened and twisted and played around with in ways that make them say things that are either more universal, more exciting. Sometimes there's an element where a genre convention can, serve to hide an uncomfortable truth about either personal or, societal life. And I think that that's something Chabon has a really strong grasp on in his writing. And I think it's something we're going to see more as we go through here, the rest of his oeuvre, so to speak. I don't know. I said so to speak. That's just his oeuvre.
One of those French words, John. Oeuvre.
Yeah. In another world, I would have studied French literature, but I wasn't sexy enough. Let's be real.
But yeah, John, I mean, great book. Chabon's got the juice, even if the ending isn't, this Chabon kid, he's going places, even if the ending doesn't quite cohere. And I read that quote and I thought, Chabon has wrote a really good literary fiction novel with Mysteries of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things where, frankly, most people's first novel is not a tenth as good as this. There are writers, successful writers whose fifth novel isn't as good as this. In some way, at least from like a prose style perspective. So I can forgive a few structural problems when you're kind of figuring out your formula. So no skin off my nose there. Very excited to get into Wonder Boys. That is going to be a first read for me as well.
So real quick about Wonder Boys, and to the listeners, I also think this is important. After writing this, when Chabon got an advance for Mysteries of Pittsburgh, that was, and I quote, $155,000 for Mysteries of Pittsburgh. At the time, people apparently received around under $7,000. And I don't know, I need to get this verified, but one can imagine that the pressure to produce a follow-up was incredibly high. And supposedly Chabon had a 1,000-page manuscript of a novel about the perfect baseball diamond that then got shipwrecked so that he could write Wonder Boys. And this is a subject we're going to return to, but the idea of him writing a mega novel and then being like, I don't actually want to write this, and then he wrote Wonder Boys is, to me, fascinating. So something to think about as we prepare for the next episode.
Well, as a certified baseball hater, I'm glad that I don't have to read that book.
John, I'd read it.
I'd probably read it too.
1,000-page about the perfect baseball diamond. And also, it exists in a box McSweeney's that I've looked for. I have searched online for, because I will not buy a box McSweeney's, but I do want to read whatever this looks like the failed version of. It's called like Fountain Park or something, the one that did not become Wonder Boys. So,
Ben, if we're going to dig more into Chabon, we are going to have to talk about McSweeney's at some point.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Well, listener, you can look forward to that in the coming weeks. Please come back and join us here in 2 weeks for a little bit of a break. We're going to be talking about some Borges short stories and just kind of the man, the myth, the legend himself, Jorge Luis Borges.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great. We're reading Tlon, and what else was it? What was the other one?
We got to read the Infinite Library of Babel, John.
Of course.
Yeah, it's the play. It's what created the structure that we now live in.
All right. Well, listeners, as always, please like and subscribe. Please leave a 5-star rating if you haven't already. It is huge for us if you can do that. We are on X, the everything site, at iLibraryPod. We're at YouTube at Infinite Library Podcast. And I think that is about it.
Yeah, so stay tuned, and we'll hope we'll see you guys again.
Summer books.
Summer books. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir. You can support our show by supporting them. We hope you'll join us back in the stacks for the next episode soon. Semper Books, bookheads.